I just have a sort of a quick update. I suppose, first of all, from the terms of the Belfast Clinic and the Belfast Trust, there's been a rapid fall in our COVID-19 admissions, and that's sort of representing also with a reduction in the ICU patients. They're taking a sort of a longer time to reduce in number, which I think is kind of what you expect. There's always a bit of a lag, but there's certainly, the admissions are falling quite rapidly, and we're now sort of very much over the peak. So the Belfast Trust are kind of putting in plan, what they're calling a recovery plan to get services opened up again. And there's a lot of emphasis on things like theatres opening again, in terms of particularly with orthopaedics in Musgrave Park and so on. So there does seem to be a lot of effort now to kind of kickstart just generally the Belfast Trust services. There's still no face-to-face clinics in the City Hospital. I'm not sure how long that's going to be. There's nothing imminently on the horizon for that, but they are offering a kind of a blood hub now, that if you like, for example, if I were to review one of you at clinic and suggest that you needed your bloods taken, the Belfast Trust would have a way of kind of booking appointments for patients to come and have their bloods taken. And the GPs are now, some of the GPs are now refusing to do bloods because they know that this is available. So I haven't really had much experience or use of that yet, but I think that does seem to be working quite well as a model. From about April time, clinics are opening elsewhere. So, for example, I do a clinic in the Children's Hospital and in Antrim, and I know that there's other places like the Ulster and have opened up their clinics too. So although the TS clinic that we know as the TS clinic is still face to face, it would be possible to see TS patients on a different site at a face to face appointment if we felt that was necessary. So that's something I suppose to keep in mind. But for the time being, the TS clinic will remain by telephone for now. I mean, I suppose in terms of kind of potential positives from the pandemic, these face-to-face meetings, or these virtual meetings, are becoming more and more commonplace within the trust. We've now been invited to, there's a paediatric neurology MDT meeting once a month that we are now being invited to go to. If there's any kind of complex genetic patients with difficult epilepsy and so on. And the paediatric nephrologists have also been in touch with me to try and sort of strengthen links with the renal side with the TS clinic as well. So I think those are kind of potential positives. I think it's so much easier to kind of do a joint clinic with somebody else whenever you don't necessarily have to be in the same room, and you organise schedules that way, and to kind of sort of do it in an ad hoc way with, targeting it to patients that need that kind of input at that particular time. So I think that's going to be a helpful thing going forward, to kind of strengthen those links with the paediatric population. I suppose we haven't had the same response from the adult nephrologists or anything yet, but perhaps in time. I think the adult services are just so much more busy. It's harder for them to link in with us. But at least this is a start. I just wanted to mention Epidelex just a little bit. To be honest, I haven't really any great experience with it, and in terms of prescribing for epilepsy, that's very much in the hands of nephrology, neurology. That's something I wouldn't really be involved in. I just to kind of a little bit with Everolimus, that Everolimus has sort of got the license for refractory epilepsy over the age of 3 years of age. The Epidelex is more, it seems to be more sort of, from what I can see, sort of in the older population. There are nice guidelines for some epilepsy syndromes like Lennox-Gastaut, which would say that it be licensed for those over the age of 2. So there are certainly, it does seem to be effective in reducing seizures in the right kind of patient. If they have refractory epilepsy, and it seems to be well tolerated. There was a recent paper published, which I have a reference for at the end of the slides here. I suppose in terms of comparing it to Everolimus, the Everolimus has been shown to change and reduce the size of segas and AMLs, and the Epidelex less so. It doesn't seem to have the same effect on the growth of the renal or the brain lesions. So I suppose it would probably be better off in TS patients who didn't have any renal lesions, I suppose, because you're not getting the dual effect. And I did see one report where somebody was on everolimus, and it kind of seemed to clash with the Epidiolex. The everolimus levels, the blood levels went up quite significantly. So I think it's probably a sort of case of being on one or the other rather than both. So I suppose it's a bit of sort of watch and wait sort of situation, but probably I would see it as more as a kind of maybe in the pediatric age group where you didn't have renal lesions, as maybe it being of more value. And that's really, I suppose, all I can say. And as I say, I have very little experience, well, no direct experience on it myself. And in terms of, I just want to mention a little bit about the vaccine. As Charlie was saying, I think all TS patients should be vaccinated now. You know, I sort of get the impression maybe it's slightly patchy. Some patients have asked me to write letters of support, and others have seemed to have got the vaccine without any effort from me. You know, so it does seem to be some people are recognised as being vulnerable, and other people have to kind of justify that they're vulnerable. I think if you were on the original shielding list, I think that seems to have been where the GPs have targeted their vaccines. But if anybody is having any difficulty getting the vaccine, let me know. You know, Charlie, I think there's some discussion about whether or not paediatric patients need it, but at the moment it's the over 18s and onwards. And it's, I mean, and it seems to be very well tolerated. You know, I haven't has had any kind of significant side effects with it. I want to just draw your attention slightly to an update that was sent to us through the trust from the BMJ a couple of weeks ago, just in terms of breast screening. I know this is a really niche area and doesn't apply to the majority of people in this setting, but patients who have a COVID-19 vaccine, it would be not normal to have an inflammatory response to the vaccine, and therefore normal for some people to get an increase in the size of lymph nodes, you know, maybe around the neck, but also in the armpits. And if you then have a mammogram shortly after your vaccine, you can get, you know, obviously the mammogram would see swelling of lymph nodes and consider that as potentially, you know, representing cancer. So basically what they're saying is that you should sort of make sure that you have your vaccine, receive it at a different time, you know, from the mammogram. So they do have a mammogram 4 to 6 weeks after you've had a COVID vaccine to make sure that you're not sort of seeing raised lymph nodes. So I mean I mean, as I mentioned, that's obviously quite a very niche area that doesn't apply to the vast majority of people here today. But it did make me think a little bit just about being breast aware. You know, we have a lot of young people now who sort of going into early adulthood with TS who have some learnings. And, you know, how do you teach patients at that age, you know, with some sort of vulnerability, you know, about being things like, well, initially with breast aware, and actually when I did a bit of a Google search, there's quite a lot of information out there. The websites here that have listed cancer research have a bit about information about it. There's this piece, a website, Books Beyond Words, and they cover examination in patients with some degree of learning difficulties. They cover, you know, testicular examination. They cover mammograms, cervical smears, and all sorts of things. And I think it is important to just sort of, whenever your child is becoming, you know, sort of a young adult, to kind of, you know, get on board with all of those kind of those sort of screening programs, because obviously patients with TS are susceptible to any kind of cancer like the rest of us are, and they should be getting the screening that everyone else in the general population is getting, in terms of, you know, smears and mammograms and so on. And that, I mean, that's everything I wanted to say. That's that was the one paper that just mentioned the reaction to everolimus, and then this is the paper just recently out about the TS. So I mean, I'm happy to kind of send my last 2 slides, you know, within the group, just so you have those websites available and those papers.